The day Alma Bailey buried her husband was the same day she decided she would not cry in front of anyone in Caldwell, Kansas ever again, and she had kept that promise to herself for nearly 2 years without a single moment of weakness. It was the spring of 1882, and the wind off the prairie came hot and restless through the open windows of the dry goods store that Alma had inherited along with a modest debt, a mule named Gerald, and the quiet, persistent sympathy of every person in a town that had nothing better to do than watch a widow manage. She was 26 years old, brown-haired and brown-eyed, with hands that had grown calloused from hauling sacks of flour and cornmeal and salt, and a mouth that had learned to press itself into a polite, closed line whenever someone started a sentence with, "It must be so hard for you alone." She was not alone, she would think. She had Gerald. She had the store. She had her routine, which began before sunup and ended long after the oil in her lamp had burned low, and she had the particular satisfaction of knowing that the debt her late husband Thomas had left behind was shrinking, dollar by careful dollar, month by month, because she was stubborn enough and organized enough and frankly determined enough to make it shrink. Thomas Bailey had been a decent man who drank more than was good for him, and speculated on cattle routes with money that should have gone to pay the supplier in Wichita. She had loved him in the way you love someone you have made a life with, someone whose presence fills the corners of a room and whose absence creates a strange hollow in those same corners. She missed him, but she did not miss being afraid of what he might sign his name to while she slept. Caldwell in 1882 sat right on the edge of the Cherokee Strip, a cattle town that had seen its years of wildness and was now settling, the way a man settles after too many nights of drinking, into something that resembled respectability. The trail drives still came through, and the cowboys still came with them, and there were still enough saloons to make the preacher unhappy on Sunday mornings, but there were also families now, and a schoolhouse, and a woman named Mrs. Hendrick who had organized a ladies' reading circle that met on Wednesday evenings and served terrible coffee. Alma did not attend the reading circle. She was usually doing inventory on Wednesday evenings. It was on a Tuesday morning in late April that Paul Abbott rode into Caldwell, which Alma would not have known or cared about, except that his horse threw a shoe on the main street directly in front of her store, and the resulting commotion knocked over the barrel of dried beans she had placed on the boardwalk as an advertisement for the week's best price, and dried beans scattered in every direction across the wooden slats and into the street like a biblical catastrophe of legumes. "I am so sorry," said the man on the horse. He said it before the horse had even finished its limping stop, and he swung down with the ease of someone who had spent more of his life in a saddle than out of one, and he bent immediately to begin picking up beans with his bare hands. Alma stood in the doorway of her store and watched him for a moment. He was tall, with the kind of sun-darkened skin that came from years of working outdoors, and he wore a trail-worn canvas duster over a blue shirt that had been washed so many times the color had faded to the shade of a late afternoon sky. His hat was brown and battered, and he had it pushed back on his head at the moment, both hands occupied with scooping beans back toward the barrel. He was perhaps 28 or 29, with dark hair and a jaw that had not seen a razor in several days. "You don't need to do that," Alma said. "I knocked them over," he said, not looking up. "My horse knocked them over, which amounts to the same thing. Horses lose shoes. It happens. Not usually into somebody's merchandise." He straightened and deposited a handful of beans into the barrel and looked at her then, and she saw that his eyes were a very clear gray, the color of creek water in the shade. "Paul Abbott," he said, and he pulled his hat off and held it against his chest in a gesture so automatic and genuine that she blinked. "Alma Bailey," she said, "that's my store." "Then I owe you a genuine apology, and probably whatever those beans were worth." "The apology is sufficient," she said, because she had been raised to say things like that, and because she was also calculating in her head that the scattered beans amounted to perhaps half a pound's worth of product that would need to be swept up rather than sold. And that was not nothing, but neither was it worth making a fuss over. He looked at his horse, a solid bay gelding who was holding his left front hoof off the ground with the put-upon expression of an animal that had been inconvenienced and wished everyone to know it. "Is there a farrier in town?" "Hank Oswald, end of the street." "He's good and he's not too expensive." "I'm obliged." He gathered the reins and began to lead the horse in the direction she had indicated, and then he stopped and turned back. "I'll come back for those last few beans," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that was not quite a joke and not quite earnest, but somehow both at once, and despite herself, Alma felt the corner of her mouth move. She swept the rest of the beans up herself, because she was not going to stand in the street waiting for a stranger to make good on a half-serious promise about legumes. But she did find herself, once or twice during the morning, glancing through the window in the direction of Hank Oswald's smithy. He came back in the late morning, as he had apparently meant to do literally, because he was carrying a small paper sack from the mercantile 2 doors down, and he set it on the counter without ceremony. "Half a pound of dried beans," he said, "best I could estimate." Alma looked at the sack and then at him. "You actually came back." "I said I would. People say things." "I try not to say things I don't mean." He looked around the store with the observant quiet of someone who notices details, taking in the orderly shelves and the handwritten price cards, and the way the light fell through the front windows onto the neat stacks of folded fabric at the far end. "Nice store," he said. "Well organized." "Thank you." She put the sack of beans under the counter. "Are you passing through?" "I was," he said. "I had a job waiting for me over at the Draper Ranch about 12 miles east, but I heard in town that old man Draper sold up last winter and the new family isn't hiring until fall. The Conleys bought that ranch. They're still getting settled. So I heard." He leaned against the counter, not in a presumptuous way, but in the way of a man who has been in the saddle since before dawn and whose legs would appreciate a moment of stillness. "I'm going to need to find something in the meantime. I've got some money but not enough to be idle for 4 months. What kind of work do you do?" "Ranch hand, mostly. Some carpentry. I can turn my hand to most things that need doing." He paused. "I'm not a gunfighter, if that's what the expression on your face is asking." "That wasn't what my expression was asking," she said, although she was not entirely certain what her expression had been. "Good." He straightened up. "Well, I'll let you get back to your work. Thank you for the directions to the farrier." He put his hat on, nodded to her and walked out, and Alma watched him go and then turned back to the invoice she had been working on before the beans incident, and she told herself that was the end of that. It was not the end of that. Over the following week, Paul Abbott turned up in her store 3 more times. The first time he bought tobacco and a box of matches and a can of peaches, which seemed like the purchases of a man eating alone in a boarding-house room, which was apparently what he was doing at Mrs. Garber's place on the north side of town. The second time he came in to ask if she knew anyone who needed carpentry work done, and she directed him to the Hendrick family who had been trying to get their barn extended for the past month. The third time he came in for flour and salt pork, and he lingered a little, asking her about the town, about whether the cattle trade was still strong, about how long she had been running the store. She answered his questions because she was a shopkeeper and he was a customer, and then she asked him how the carpentry job had gone, because she was curious, and he said it had gone well, and that Mr. Hendrick had asked him to come back to do the fencing when the lumber came in. "You're going to end up staying," she said, and she meant it as a neutral observation. "Towns have a way of doing that," he said. "You find one corner to stand in and before you know it you've got roots." "Did you have roots somewhere before?" He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone choosing what to say rather than deciding whether to answer. "Missouri," he said, "before the war tore it apart. Then Texas for a few years. Then Colorado. I've been moving for a long time." He said it without self-pity in a matter-of-fact tone, But there was something underneath it that she recognized, the particular quality of a person who has lost something they did not fully understand they were losing until it was gone. "The store was my husband's," she said, because the sentence came out before she had decided to say it. "He passed 2 years ago. I kept it." "I'm sorry," he said, and he said it the way she appreciated, without elaboration or the list of condolences that usually followed, just a clean, simple acknowledgement. "Thank you." She took his money for the flour and the salt pork and gave him his change, and he nodded and went out. And this time she found herself thinking about his gray eyes for an embarrassingly long portion of the afternoon. The fencing job at the Hendrick place lasted 2 weeks, and during those 2 weeks Paul Abbott came into Bailey's dry goods every few days for various supplies, and each time they talked a little more, and each time she found herself standing at the counter longer after he left, her hands still on whatever she had just put down, her mind following after the conversation the way a river follows a channel. She told herself she was being ridiculous. She had a store to run and a debt to pay and a reputation in this town that depended on her being sensible and steady. She was a widow, and while no one had said outright that widows were not permitted to notice a pair of clear gray eyes or a voice that was low and unhurried and occasionally funny in a way that surprised her, she had the feeling that Caldwell was a town that had opinions about such things and was not shy about expressing them. Martha Elgin, who was her nearest neighbor and a woman who conducted surveillance on the street from her parlor window with the dedication of a military officer, stopped her on the boardwalk one afternoon in early May. "I see that new man has been in your store quite a bit," Martha said, with the particular tone of someone raising an observation to a question level without quite committing to the question. "He has," Alma said. "He buys things. That is what a dry goods store is for." "He's very tall," Martha said. "I hadn't noticed," Alma said, which was a lie, and Martha's expression told her that Martha knew it was a lie. "He helped the Hendrick boy get down from the roof of the schoolhouse yesterday," Martha said. "Apparently the boy climbed up after a ball and got scared. Mr. Abbott was passing and climbed right up and got him down. That was kind of him. Very kind." Martha gave her the look that people in small towns give when they have said the thing they wanted to say and are satisfied. "Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, Alma." Alma went back into the store and straightened a shelf that did not need straightening. It was a Wednesday evening when the larger trouble of the story began, the kind of trouble that arrives in a town the way a storm arrives over the prairie, visible from a long way off but no less disruptive for the warning. A man named Harlan Croak came into Caldwell with 2 of his associates, and Harlan Croak was the type of man whose presence rearranged the air in a room, not because of anything supernatural, but because he was large and loud and accustomed to people stepping back when he stepped forward. Harlan Croak, as it turned out, had purchased the debt that Thomas Bailey had owed to the Wichita supplier. The supplier had sold the debt some months ago to a man who had sold it in turn to Croak, and Croak had arrived in Caldwell to inform Alma that the repayment schedule she had worked out with the original creditor was null and void, and that he wanted the full remaining amount, which was $140, within 30 days. He came to the store on that Wednesday evening when she was doing inventory and the street was quiet, and he was polite in the way that men who mean to be threatening sometimes are, all surface courtesy and underlying pressure, like a rock wrapped in velvet. "I'm just a businessman, Mrs. Bailey," he said, standing in the middle of her store in his good coat, his hat still on because he had not taken it off. "I paid for that debt and I expect it to be honored. The original terms were agreed upon in good faith," Alma said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced keeping her voice steady over the past 2 years under far less comfortable conditions than this. "I have been paying according to those terms." "Those terms belong to a different agreement," Croak said. "I'm offering you 30 days, which is more than generous." $140 in 30 days is not possible," she said. "Not on a dry goods store's income in this town." Croak smiled in the way that made her want to take a step back, and she did not take a step back. Then you might want to think about whether there are other arrangements that could satisfy the debt. He let the ambiguity of that sit in the air for a moment, and then he nodded and left, his two associates following him out like shadows that wore boots. Alma stood in the middle of her store for a long moment after the door closed, and then she sat down on the stool behind the counter and put her hands flat on the wood and breathed. She was still sitting there 20 minutes later when the bell above the door rang and Paul Abbott came in with a list of items he needed for a job he was starting the next morning. He stopped when he saw her face. "What happened?" he said. "Nothing." She stood up. "What do you need?" He looked at her for a long moment. He was holding his hat in his hands the way he often did when he was indoors, turning it slightly by the brim in what she had come to recognize as a gesture of thinking rather than nervousness. "Alma," he said, and it was the first time he had used her first name, and something about it made the careful composure she had been holding slip sideways just slightly. She told him. She told him in flat, factual terms, the way she told herself things when she needed to hear them clearly, about the debt and Croak and the 30 days. She told him about Thomas and the original supplier and the arrangement she had worked out over the past 2 years. She told him the numbers because the numbers were real and she trusted real things. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. "Do you have documentation of the original agreement, the terms you worked out?" "Yes." "And can the debt legally be transferred to another party without your consent?" She blinked. "I don't know. There are rules about that," he said. "Commercial law. I don't know all of it, but I know enough to think that a transfer of debt terms may not be legal without notification and agreement from the debtor. There's a lawyer in town, isn't there? Daniel Marsh. He mostly does property disputes." "He'd know," Paul said, "or he could find out." He set his hat down on the counter and leaned forward on both hands. "Before you let this man frighten you into thinking you have no options, let's find out what your options actually are." "He didn't frighten me," she said automatically. Paul looked at her, and the look was not unkind, but it was clear. "You were sitting on that stool staring at nothing when I came in," he said. "That's a woman who's been frightened, and there's no shame in it. He meant to frighten you, that's his game." The accuracy of it was uncomfortable. "I'll see Daniel Marsh tomorrow," she said. "Good." He picked up his hat. "And in the meantime, if Croak or his men come back, don't talk to them alone. Send for me or for the sheriff." "I don't need someone to hold my hand," she said, not sharply but firmly. "I know that," Paul said, and the way he said it suggested he genuinely meant it. "That's not what I'm offering. I'm offering an extra set of eyes and a reason for a man like Croak to think twice before he applies pressure. There's a difference." She looked at him. He looked back at her. "All right," she said. He gave her a short nod and then read her his list, and she filled the order. And when he left, she stood at the window and watched him walk down the darkened street. And something in her chest that had been clenched since Croak walked out of her door eased by a small but measurable degree. The meeting with Daniel Marsh was illuminating. Marsh was a thin, dry man with spectacles who took his work seriously and had an excellent head for the fine print of things. And after examining Alma's original agreement and listening to her account of Croak's visit, he told her that the original agreement did in fact contain a provision that prevented transfer of the debt terms without written consent from the debtor, and that Croak's demand for full payment within 30 days was therefore not legally enforceable. "Now," Marsh said, peering at her over his spectacles, "whether a man like Croak cares about what is legally enforceable is another question. But you have standing here, Mrs. Bailey. You have the paperwork. If he takes this to a judge, and I strongly encourage you to welcome it if he does, he will lose." "And if he doesn't take it to a judge?" she asked. Marsh removed his spectacles. "Then you are dealing with a man who prefers pressure to law, and that is a different kind of problem." He put his spectacles back on. "The sheriff's office should be made aware." Alma told Sheriff Tom Breckett that same afternoon. Breckett was a competent, careful man who had been in Caldwell long enough to know the difference between a legal dispute and a threat, and he listened to her with his hands folded on his desk and said that Croak's name was not unfamiliar to him, that the man had done business of a similar nature in 2 other towns along the trail, and that he would pay Croak a visit. "Don't let him know I came to you," Alma said, and then felt immediately ridiculous for saying it. Brackett's expression was kind. "I'll be clear that the office keeps its eye on certain kinds of commercial activity," he said. "That should carry the message without putting your name on it." When she came out of the sheriff's office, Paul was waiting on the boardwalk outside. He was sitting on the bench along the wall with his elbows on his knees and his hat in his hands, and he stood up when she came out. "How did it go?" he asked. "When did you follow me here?" she asked. "I didn't follow you. I was coming by to see if you wanted someone to walk with you, and I saw you go in." He said it simply, without apology or embarrassment. "How did it go?" She told him, and as she talked they walked together down the main street in the warm May afternoon, and it was the most natural thing she could remember doing in a very long time, just walking beside someone and talking, the sun on her face and the smell of dust and horses and green things on the air. "Marsh is right," Paul said. "The paperwork is on your side. Brackett knowing is good. Croak is the kind of man who looks for situations where no one is watching, and now someone is." "You seem to know something about men like Croak," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I grew up around a man who used money the way a fist uses air," he said. "You learn to recognize the technique." She did not press him on it. She had the sense, walking beside him, that Paul Abbott carried things the way she did, not ostentatiously, not asking for witness, but carrying them still. "Thank you," she said, "for last night, for thinking clearly when I couldn't." "You were thinking clearly," he said. "You just needed a minute. Most people would have told me I should sell the store." "Most people would be wrong," he said. "It's your store. You built it back up after your husband died. Anyone who looks at those accounts and that inventory and the way you run that place knows you built it. It's yours." She stopped walking. They were in front of the store now, and she turned to look at him, and the afternoon light was very clear and very warm, and he was looking at her with those gray eyes that saw things straight on, without the softening filter of politeness or pity. "You're a very uncommon person, Paul Abbott," she said. Something moved across his face, something she might have called startled. "I don't know about that," he said. "I know about that," she said, and she went into the store. May settled into itself, golden and warm and busy, because the cattle drives were coming through, and the trail hands needed supplies, and Caldwell's Main Street was loud with the particular noise of commerce and horses and men who had been on the trail for weeks and had money to spend. Alma's store did well in this season, and she worked long hours and fell into bed at night with the satisfying exhaustion of someone whose labor is converting directly into security. Croak made no further move after Brackett's visit, and while Alma did not let herself relax entirely, she noted his absence from the main street with quiet satisfaction. Whatever Brackett had said to him had apparently given him pause. Paul finished the Hendrick fencing and took on 2 more jobs, one repairing the roof of the grain storage at the south end of town, and one doing finish carpentry for a family named Morse who had just built a house and needed their kitchen fitted out. He was good at the work in the quiet, methodical way of someone who has learned to do things properly, because doing them properly the first time saves time later, and his reputation in the town built itself with the same methodical quality. He came into the store most days now. Sometimes he bought things, and sometimes he just stopped in between jobs with the air of a man who has a reason to be somewhere and knows it. He would lean against the counter and they would talk about the town and the cattle trade and the weather, and, increasingly, about other things. About books, because it turned out Paul had read widely and had strong opinions about Dickens and the particular quality of Mark Twain's humor. About the prairie and what it felt like to live in a place where you could see for 30 miles in any direction. About Missouri before the war, which he talked about in fragments, like a person handling something fragile, offering pieces of it slowly. His father had been a farmer who had lost everything in the violence of the border wars. Paul had been 14 when the farm burned and 15 when his father died, and he had spent the years between 15 and 22 working cattle drives from Texas to the railheads in Kansas, learning the trade of a range hand from the ground up. He had come to carpentry through necessity, in the years when the big cattle drives were slowing, and a man needed more than one skill to stay employed, and he had found that he was good at it, that there was something in the building of things that satisfied a part of him that the open trail had never quite reached. Alma told him things too. About her childhood in Illinois, in a house full of sisters and the particular noise of a family that talked over itself. About Thomas and their marriage, which she described honestly rather than sentimentally. A good man with a weakness and a woman who had loved him anyway and grieved him genuinely, and then had to pick up the pieces practically. About the first winter after Thomas died, which had been the hardest thing she had ever done, not the grief exactly but the terror of the numbers, the debt on one side and the income on the other, and the space between them that she had to close entirely through her own effort and no other. "How much of it is left?" he asked once. $42, she said. 3 months, maybe 4. And then it's yours free and clear. And then it's mine, she said, and the way she said it carried everything she had put into those 2 years. He looked at her with an expression she had started to recognize, something warm and very direct that he did not try to disguise or moderate, and she felt her breath change, the way breath changes when something is approaching. She was not ready for what was approaching. She told herself that clearly and firmly. She had $42 of debt, and a store that needed her full attention, and a reputation in this town that was built on her being someone who was steady and capable, and not prone to romantic foolishness. She told herself all of this with great thoroughness and conviction, and then she thought about his hands when he was explaining something, the way they moved to illustrate a point, and she swept the floor of the store with perhaps more force than was strictly necessary. It was Martha Elgin who said it out loud, which was approximately what Alma had expected. "He is in love with you," Martha said, over the fence between their properties one evening in June. "Martha," Alma said. "I have eyes," Martha said. "The man looks at you the way a thirsty man looks at water. He has been looking at you that way for 6 weeks. He is a customer and a friend," Alma said. "This town takes the most ordinary human decency and turns it into gossip." "I am not gossiping," Martha said, with the serene confidence of a woman who does not acknowledge the word gossip as applicable to her activities. "I am telling you what is plain. And I am also telling you that you look at him the same way before you say anything about customers and friends." Alma said nothing. "There is nothing wrong with it," Martha said, in a gentler tone. "Thomas has been gone 2 years. You are not a woman who needs to be in mourning forever, and that man is steady and kind and clearly not going anywhere." "People always think they are not going anywhere until they do," Alma said. Martha was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "That is a fear, not a fact." Alma went inside, but Martha's words sat in her, the way uncomfortable truths do, not loudly but persistently, like a stone in a boot. And she found herself over the next days noticing Paul more precisely, more deliberately, in the way of a person who has been told to look at something and cannot stop looking. She noticed the way he listened, giving things his full attention without the restless distraction that many people brought to conversation. She noticed the way he was with other people in the town, easy and respectful, without either servility or arrogance. She noticed that he had gradually become someone the town relied on in small ways, the kind of man who people looked to first when something needed doing. She noticed that when he came into the store and she was busy with another customer, he waited without impatience, and that the moment the other customer left, the quality of the air in the room changed, just slightly, as if something had been turned up by a fraction. She was terrified. She was not going to let herself be terrified. These were 2 contradictory positions she held simultaneously throughout the month of June, and they exhausted her. The situation with Croak resolved itself in a way that was anticlimactic, as situations sometimes do when their underpinnings are removed. Marsh sent a formal letter to Croak citing the protection clause in the original debt agreement, and Sheriff Breckett had a second conversation with him, more pointed than the first, and at the end of June, Croak left Caldwell without further incident. Alma heard through the town's information network that he had moved on to another town further west, and she allowed herself a day of genuine relief before she put the whole matter behind her and focused on the quarterly accounts. Paul came in the morning after she had heard the news about Croak. "Breckett told me Croak is gone," he said. "I heard the same." "Good," he looked at her. "How do you feel?" "Relieved," she said honestly. "And a little angry that I spent 2 months being afraid of a man who had no actual power." "He had some actual power," Paul said. "Just less than he wanted you to think. Those are different things." "I know." She set down the ledger she was holding. "I want to thank you properly for all of it. For the night he came in and you talked me through it, for the documents and going to Marsh, for all of it." "You did all of it," he said. "I just asked some questions." "You stayed," she said, and she meant it more broadly than the single evening, and from the look on his face he understood that. The moment sat between them. Outside, the street was busy with the ordinary June afternoon noise of Caldwell, horses and voices, and the distant sound of a hammer from somewhere. But inside the store it was quiet and warm, and the light was falling through the front windows in long golden lines across the floor. "Alma," he said, and his voice had a quality she had not heard in it before, something that was careful and full at the same time. "Paul," she said, "I want to say something and I want to say it plainly," he said. "But I'm not going to say it if it's something you don't want to hear, so I'm going to ask you first if you want to hear it." Her heart was doing something unreasonable. "That seems like a very careful approach," she said. "I am a careful man," he said. "Sometimes to a fault, my friends have told me." "I want to hear it," she said. He came around the end of the counter, which he had never done before, and he stood close enough that she could see the gray of his eyes very clearly, and he was holding his hat, she noticed, pressed against his chest in both hands, the way he held it when something mattered. "I have not felt about a place the way I feel about this town since I left Missouri," he said. "And I know that the town is not actually the thing I feel that way about. I feel that way because you are here." He paused. "I am not asking anything of you today. I know you are not someone who moves toward things quickly, and I respect that. I just wanted you to know what I feel so that it was said rather than assumed, and so that you could do with it whatever you want to do." Alma stood very still. The golden light was warm on her face, and the store smelled of dried goods and wood and the particular clean scent of his soap when he was close. "You have been in this town for 2 months," she said. "I have," he said, "and you're telling me you know what you feel." "I'm not always a fast man," he said, "but when I know something, I know it." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm going to need some time," she said. "I have time," he said, without any performance of patience, just the plain statement of a man who means it. "I'm going to need more time than most women would want," she said. "All right. And I'm going to be difficult," she said, "because I have been running things alone for 2 years and I have gotten used to it and I won't change that." "I don't want you to change that," he said. "I like how you run things. And if I decide I don't want this," she said, "I need it not to change the way you come in here and buy your flour." He looked at her with the very clear look she had come to know. "It won't change that," he said. "You have my word." She nodded once, he nodded once. He put his hat on and went to the shelf to look at the flour prices, as if the previous 5 minutes had been simply a chapter in a longer book that was ongoing and unhurried, and something in his complete ease with that, his ability to say a true and significant thing, and then simply continue, unlocked something in Alma's chest that she had not realized was locked. July in Caldwell was hot and brilliant and relentless, the way Kansas summers are, and the store was busy and Alma was busy, and Paul was busy with 2 new jobs, a water trough for the livery stable and an addition on the Morse house, and they saw each other most days, but there was not always time for the longer conversations of May and June, and yet something between them had shifted, and both of them knew it. He walked her home one evening in mid-July when the store had been robbed. It was a minor robbery, more upsetting than damaging. a broken window, and about $12 in cash from the till that she had forgotten to put in the iron box under the counter because she had been distracted at closing. The sheriff came and took a report, and 2 men in town were brought in for it within the week, and the window was repaired, and the $12 was not recovered, but it was not enough to significantly affect anything. But it had shaken her in a way she had not expected, the violation of her space, the feeling of standing in her own store and knowing someone had been there who should not have been there. Paul had come by in the evening after the sheriff had been and gone and the other neighbors had offered their sympathies and departed, and he found her in the back room of the store, which was where she did her accounts and kept her supplies, sitting on a wooden box with a cup of cold coffee she had forgotten to drink. "I'm fine," she said before he could ask. "I know you are," he said. He sat down on another box across from her. "Do you want company or would you rather be alone?" She thought about it honestly. "Company," she said, which surprised her a little. He stayed for 2 hours. They talked and they were quiet by turns, and he made her a fresh cup of coffee on the small camp stove she kept in the back for winter days when the store was cold. And they talked about Missouri and Illinois and the war and what it does to the places it passes through. And somewhere in the middle of it, Alma realized that the particular loneliness she had been carrying for 2 years, the one that sat in the corners of the store the way Thomas's absence did, had been doing something different lately. It had been getting lighter. When he left, he paused at the back door and looked at her in the lamplight and said, "You are the most capable woman I have ever met." "That is a practical compliment," she said. "I meant it as one," he said and smiled, and the smile transformed his face the way sunlight transforms a plain landscape into something remarkable, and Alma sat with her cup of coffee after he was gone and thought, with great clarity, that she was in love with Paul Abbott and there was nothing at all she could do about it. She let herself think it for one evening. Just the one evening, sitting in the lamp glow with the smell of coffee and wood around her, letting the feeling take up its full space rather than the narrow corner she had been pressing it into. She was in love with him. He was steady and honest and funny, and he saw her, not as a widow who needed managing or a woman who needed saving, but as a person he liked and respected and wanted. She was in love with him, and she was afraid of it, and she was going to walk into that fear the way she walked into everything else that frightened her, which was straight ahead. The next morning she opened the store and he came by at 10 o'clock with a piece of leftover lumber under his arm that he had brought from the Morse job because he thought it might make a good shelf for her back room. "You don't need to bring me things," she said. "I had spare lumber and you need a shelf," he said. "I have been managing without a shelf in the back room for 2 years. "I know, but the shelf will make it better." He carried the lumber to the back and measured the wall and came back for the tools he needed, and she watched him work for a while, the economical precision of it, the way he held the level, and she thought about what she was going to say and how she was going to say it. "Paul," she said. He looked up from where he was marking a measurement. "I've done my thinking," she said. He set down the pencil. He was very still. "I don't want to go slowly for the sake of going slowly," she said. "I wanted to go slowly because I wanted to be sure, and I'm sure." She paused. "I'm not easy to live alongside. I need to do things my own way. I need the store to be mine. I need to be treated as a person who makes her own decisions." "I know that about you," he said. "I knew it the second week I knew you. And you're not frightened of it." "No," he said, and there was no hesitation and no qualification, just the single word. "Then I think we ought to spend some more time together," she said. "In the deliberate way, not the customer way." He picked up his pencil and held it and looked at her with the full warmth of that expression she had been cataloging since May. "I would like that very much," he said. "Good," she said. "Now finish the shelf." He laughed, and the sound of it filled the back room and spilled into the store, and she went back out to the counter with something luminous happening in her chest, and she served the next 3 customers with the calm efficiency they expected from Alma Bailey and did not let them see a single thing, because some things were hers and she was going to keep them. August was the month everything became real. They took their first intentional walk together on a Sunday afternoon, out past the edge of town to where the prairie opened up properly, the grass going golden in the late summer heat, and the sky the enormous flat blue that Alma had once found lonely and had somehow, over the years, come to find magnificent. Paul walked beside her without filling the silence unnecessarily, which was one of the many things she appreciated about him, his understanding that silence between two people who are comfortable is not a problem to be solved. They talked about what they wanted. She told him about the store, about paying off the debt and expanding the dry goods range, about wanting eventually to have a second person helping in the shop so she could have the occasional afternoon that was her own. He told her about the work in the town, about the satisfaction of the carpentry, and the way Caldwell was growing, and how there would be more building in the coming years as the town settled further, and how he thought there was a real living to be made in it. "Would you want to stay?" she asked. "Here in Caldwell, if things were permanent?" "Yes," he said. "If things were permanent, I would want to stay." He looked at her, and the afternoon light was warm on both of them. "Is that what you're asking?" "I'm asking what you want," she said, "not what I want you to say." "I know the difference with you," he said. "Yes, I would want to stay. This is the first place since Missouri where I've wanted to stop moving. And yes, that is because of you, but it's not only because of you. It's because I can see myself here. I can see work that means something and neighbors worth knowing and a life that has its feet on the ground." She stopped walking and looked at the prairie for a moment, the long, golden reach of it. And then she turned and looked at him, and his face was open and honest in the way of someone who has decided to stop being careful and be true instead. She kissed him. She did it deliberately and without waiting for him to begin it, and she felt him still for one surprised moment, and then his hands came up to hold her face, gently and with an attention that she felt down to her bones. And when they separated, the prairie was still golden and the sky was still enormous, and she felt, for the first time in 2 years, that the corners of things were not empty. September arrived with the first breath of autumn on it, the nights cooling and the days still warm, and the town of Caldwell observed Paul Abbott and Alma Bailey with the collective attention of a community that has been following a story and is pleased with where it is going, although they observed them with a discretion that Alma had trained them toward through sheer force of direct looks whenever anyone opened a sentence with, "I couldn't help but notice." Martha Elgin said, "I told you so," exactly once, and Alma allowed it, and that was the end of the matter as far as official acknowledgement went. They went on more walks. They had supper together twice a week, alternating between her small kitchen behind the store and the boarding house dining room where he still ate most meals. He was a good cook, which surprised her, and when she told him so, he said that a man who spends 10 years on cattle drives either learns to cook or eats very badly, and he had made his choice early. He told her about his time in Texas, the great open sweeps of the panhandle country and the particular culture of the ranches, and she told him about the Illinois of her childhood, the green summer cornfields and the winters that were cold in a different way from Kansas, wetter and heavier, as if the cold was packing itself into the land. They built, piece by piece, the knowledge of each other that real love requires, not just the knowledge of what you see on the surface, but the knowledge of where a person comes from, and what that has done to them, and what they have built from it. She learned that he had nightmares sometimes about the fire that took the Missouri farm, and that he did not speak of his father often because the grief of losing him was old and complicated. He learned that she kept the letter Thomas had written her from his cattle speculation trip, the one where he had told her not to worry, everything would work out, and that she kept it as a reminder that love does not protect people from the consequences of their choices, and that loving someone clearly was better than loving them blindly. "That is a hard thing to learn," he said when she told him. "It is," she said, "but it's a good thing to know." One evening in October, after they had been courting for almost 4 months, they were sitting on the bench outside the store in the late afternoon with cups of coffee when Paul said, in a tone she recognized as the one he used when he was working up to something. "I've been thinking. That's generally a precursor to something significant," she said. "Sometimes." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been talking to Hank Oswald about whether there might be space to put up a carpentry shop on the south end of town. There's a lot of building happening, and I think there's enough steady work that I could run it properly, rather than going job to job. Oswald thinks it's a good idea and he knows the landowner." "That's a good idea," she said. "I would need some starting capital," he said. "Not a lot. I have some savings, but the materials and tools would require more than I have. I could take a small loan from the bank." "How much?" he told her. She did some rapid mental arithmetic and said, "If you borrowed half from the bank and I lent you the other half, your repayment would be lower and you'd pay less in interest." He looked at her. "I'm not going to take money from you, Alma." "It's not taking," she said. "It's a business arrangement. I'd put it in writing. A standard loan at the same rate as the bank. You could pay it back over 2 years. "That's not how I want things to be between us," he said. "Then how do you want things to be between us?" she said, looking at him directly. "Because if you're going to be stubborn about the loan, I need to understand what the alternative you're proposing is." He was quiet for a moment. "I was going to ask you to marry me," he said, "and that was going to be the alternative." Alma felt the breath leave her body. "In the spring," he said. "I was planning to wait until spring. I wanted to have the shop established first, so I was asking you as a man with a settled life and not just a man with plans." He paused. "But you have a way of making things come out before they're properly ready." "I apologize," she said, and she was not apologizing at all, and he could hear it. "The loan," he said after a moment. "If we were married, it wouldn't be a loan, it would be shared resources. I'm aware of that. And you'd be all right with it, the sharing." "I've thought about it," she said. "I've thought about all of it. The store would stay mine in the way that matters, which is that I run it and make the decisions about it. I know enough about commercial law now to know that a married woman can hold property in Kansas under the right arrangements. Marsh can draw it up. You've been to see Marsh about this." "I had a consultation," she said. "As I said, I think before I act." He looked at her with the full, warm, amused, wondering look that she had stopped trying to receive without feeling it in every part of her. "Alma Bailey," he said. "Yes. Will you marry me? Not in the spring. Now or whenever you're ready, but the question is now." She looked out at the October street, the familiar shapes of Caldwell's buildings and the familiar movement of its people, the life she had built out of debt and difficulty and determination, the life she had made entirely her own, and she thought about how love, real love, did not ask you to put down what you had built. Real love, she had come to understand, picked up a hammer and helped. "Yes," she said. "The answer is yes." He put his arm around her on the bench in front of the store in full view of Martha Elgin's parlor window and anyone else who happened to be on the main street, and she leaned into him, and the October afternoon was cool and golden and perfectly clear. They were married in November, in the small church at the east end of Caldwell, on a day when the sky was the pale steel blue of late autumn, and the prairie grass had gone the color of straw. Alma wore a dress that she and Martha Elgin had made over the course of 3 evenings from a length of deep blue wool she had had at the back of the store for 2 years, and Paul wore a new suit that he had ordered from Wichita, and that fit him well enough to make Martha Elgin tell her husband it was no wonder the Bailey widow had said yes. The church was full. Caldwell was the kind of town that turned out for occasions, and Paul had made enough friends in his months there that there were faces on both sides of the aisle, and Alma's friend Clara from the reading circle she had finally, reluctantly, begun attending in September, sat in the front row and wept with entirely undisguised enthusiasm. Daniel Marsh had drawn up the documentation that made the store legally Alma's separate property, and Paul had signed it without complaint or condition, and Alma had stood in Marsh's office watching him sign, and felt a love for him so clear and so complete that she had to look away at the window to keep herself composed. Sheriff Breckett was there at the wedding, and Hank Oswald and the Hendrick family, and the Morses, and a dozen other people who had watched Paul Abbott come to Caldwell holding nothing but the tools in his saddlebag and a bay horse with a thrown shoe, and who had watched him build himself into this place one reliable action at a time. When Reverend Collins said the words and Paul slid the ring onto her finger, a simple band of silver that he had chosen himself from a jewelry maker in Wichita, Alma looked up at his face and found him already looking at her with that clear and open expression that she now understood was just how he looked at her always, and she thought that there was nothing frightening about it anymore. It was just true. They stayed in her rooms behind the store through the winter, and the winter of 1882 going into 1883 was one of the coldest Kansas winters in recent memory, with storms that came down off the plains and piled snow against the doors and froze the water in the horse troughs overnight. But the store was warm and the rooms behind it were warm, and Paul had spent October and November adding extra insulation to the walls in a project that Alma had pretended not to notice was being done for her comfort, and they were very warm that winter in all the ways that mattered. He started work on the carpentry shop in March, when the ground thawed enough to break it. He had the loan from the bank and the arrangement with Alma, which was no longer technically a loan, but a matter of shared household resources. And he had Hank Oswald's introductions and a small growing reputation that had been built on doing good work and being trustworthy. And the shop came together through the spring with the help of 2 young men from town who he took on as assistants. Alma paid off the last of Thomas's debt in April of 1883, exactly 1 year earlier than she had originally projected. She did not make a ceremony of it, but when she came back from the bank and put the receipt in the iron box under the counter, she stood still for a moment with her hand on the lid of the box and felt something settle in her, some weight that had been at the floor of everything for 2 years quietly resting down into the earth where it belonged. Paul was in the shop when she went over to tell him. He was fitting a door frame, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hair dusty with sawdust, and she walked in and he looked up and read her face immediately. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she said. He set down the plane he was holding and came to her and held her, right there in the half-built shop with the smell of fresh lumber around them, and she put her head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat and thought that she had not been held like this with someone's whole attention since she could not remember. "It was always going to be done," he said into her hair. "I knew that about you from the beginning." $42, she said. $42, he agreed. Summer came and the store did well and the carpentry shop did well, and the town of Caldwell continued its transformation from a rough trail town into something more permanent, with new families and new buildings and a general quality of settling into itself. Paul's shop became the place people went when they needed good work done, and his 2 young assistants learned quickly and added their own skills to the operation. And by the fall of 1883, he had more work than he could take and was thinking about expanding. They talked in the evenings on the bench outside the store, the same bench where he had asked her to marry him, and over supper in the kitchen that was now both of theirs, and on Sunday walks when the prairie was putting on its seasonal displays, the spring green and the summer gold and the autumn rust and bronze. They talked about work and the town and the small daily events that make up a life lived together, and they talked about larger things too, about what they hoped for and what they had come from. She became pregnant in the spring of 1884. She told him on a Tuesday morning before the store opened, when they were sitting at the kitchen table with their coffee, and she said it plainly because that was how she said things, and he looked at her for one long quiet moment, and then he put down his coffee cup and covered her hand with both of his and said, "Are you all right?" "I'm well," she said. "A little tired in the mornings, it's early." "How do you feel about it?" he asked, because that was how he asked things. "Terrified," she said honestly. "And very glad. Both of those seem right," he said. She ran the store through the summer and into the early fall, adjusting her hours slightly as the pregnancy advanced and accepting, with more grace than she had expected, the help that Clara and Martha and Paul and the two boys from the shop offered in various practical ways. She hired a girl named Dora, 17 and quick-minded and eager, to help with the counter work, and found that having Dora there allowed her to handle the accounts and ordering from the back room without losing track of the store's needs. She told Paul once, lying awake in the dark, that she was afraid of what childbirth would mean for all of it. For the store, he said. For everything, she said. For who I am. For the way I've built things. He was quiet for a moment. You will still be who you are, he said. A child doesn't undo you, it adds to you, and you are more than the store, Alma. You've always been more than the store. The store is what kept me, she said. I know, he said, and it will keep keeping you. You'll still run it. Dora will help and I'll help, and there will be a person in the world who will know from the beginning that their mother built something and held on to it. He paused. I think that's a good thing to know. She turned toward him in the dark. How do you always say the right thing? I don't always, he said. You've told me several times when I've gotten it wrong. You remember those times. I try to learn from them. She kissed him in the dark and thought that whatever had made her lucky enough to have this particular steadiness and warmth and honesty in the bed beside her at 3 in the morning, she was grateful for it in a way that was almost too large to hold. Their son was born in December of 1884, a winter baby who came into the world with considerable volume and opinion, which Alma said was not surprising given who his parents were. They named him James, after Paul's father, which Paul had not expected her to suggest, and which undid him completely in a way she had never seen before. He held the baby in the delivery room after the doctor and Martha and Clara had finished their business, and the lamp was low and the room was warm. And Alma watched Paul hold their son with the same focused attention he brought to everything that mattered to him. And she thought she had never seen anything quite as beautiful as a good man who is not afraid of being tender. James, he said very quietly to the baby, who was looking at him with the deep, unfocused gaze of a person who has just arrived somewhere after a long journey. Welcome. Dora proved herself so capable at the store that Alma made her a full partner in the management within the year, keeping the ownership firmly in her own hands, but allowing Dora the authority to make daily decisions and handle the ordering on days when Alma was occupied with James, or with the expanding interests of a household and a life that had grown considerably from its 2 years of debt and quiet determination form. By 1886, Paul's carpentry shop had grown into a proper business with 4 workers and more contracts than they could always fill, and he had become enough of a fixture in Caldwell's construction and renovation life that the town council had asked him to sit on a committee about the planned expansion of the main street, which he accepted without fanfare and approached with his characteristic combination of practical sense and genuine interest in getting things right. James, at 2 years old, was a loud, curious, thoroughly mobile person who had his mother's determination and his father's steadiness in some balance that was still working itself out, and who had charmed essentially everyone in Caldwell who had come into contact with him, including Martha Elgin, who made it known that she had predicted he would be extraordinary from the moment she had heard about the pregnancy. It was a March evening in 1886, one of those early spring evenings when the air is still cold, but there is something in it that is not winter anymore, a lightness and a smell of earth waking up, that something happened which Alma would carry with her for the rest of her life as the story she told when she wanted to explain what she and Paul were to each other. She had been in the store doing inventory because some things do not change, and James was asleep in the back room in the small cot she kept there for exactly this purpose, and it was past closing time and the street was quiet. Paul had been in the shop all day working on a large commission, a fitted interior for the new bank building, which had been consuming all his working hours for weeks, and she had not expected him until supper. She heard boots on the boardwalk, the particular rhythm of his stride, which she knew the way you know the sound of wind in your own window. The door opened and he came in, and he was holding his hat in his hands, and he looked at her with an expression she had not seen before. Something that was not quite distress but was not equanimity either. Something in between that suggested news of significance. She looked at him and said, without knowing quite why she said it in this particular way, "Whatever you are about to say, take a breath first." He stopped. He looked at her. He took a breath. She saw his shoulders come down, saw the sharp quality of whatever he had been carrying across the street dissipate by several degrees. "I got a letter today," he said, "from a law firm in Missouri. My father's farm, the one that burned. It was never properly transferred from the family name after the fire. There's been a legal process for abandoned land, and they've found me as the surviving heir. The land is mine if I want it." She was very still. "Missouri," she said. "Missouri," he said. The silence held for a long moment. James made a small sound in the back room and was quiet again. "How much land?" she said. "About 80 acres, he said. "Good bottom land, the letter says. Some of the buildings can be repaired." She looked at him. He looked at her. Between them was the store, her store, and behind her the shelves she had organized with her own hands, and the accounts she had kept, and the debt she had paid, and the life she had built here. And outside was Caldwell, which was their town now, the town where they had met over spilled beans, and where he had asked her to marry him on a bench in October, and where James had been born in December lamplight. "What do you want?" She said. "I want to know what you want," he said. "I asked first," she said. He was quiet for a moment, and she watched him think, really think, with the full honesty she had always loved about him. "I want to hold on to it," he said. "It's the last thing that's my father's. I want it to exist somewhere with my name on it. But I don't want to go back to Missouri, Alma. This is my home. You are my home. This town and this store and that boy asleep in the back and the shop and the bench outside and all of it. I don't want to leave any of it." She felt the warmth of it settle through her, complete and unhurried. "We can hold the land," she said. "We can have someone work it on shares the way some people do, or we can keep it and visit and see what becomes of it. It doesn't mean leaving." He looked at her. "I thought you might say we should sell it," he said. "Why would I say that?" she said. "It's your father's land. It's James's inheritance if he wants it someday. It's something that belongs to your history, and you should have it." He crossed the store in 3 steps and held her face in his hands the way he had the first time he had kissed her, out on the prairie with the gold grass all around them, and he looked at her for a long moment as if he was making sure she was real. "I love you," he said. "I know," she said. "I've never been sure you know," he said. "I know," she said. "I've always known." He kissed her. There in the closed store with the lamp burning low, and the first smell of Kansas spring coming through the cracked window, and James asleep in the back with his small, perfect solemnity. And it was the kind of kiss that is not a beginning and not an end, but simply the ongoing fact of 2 people who have chosen each other every day without drama or difficulty, but with the sustained and purposeful attention of people who know what they have. The land in Missouri was put in the care of a reputable farm manager that the law firm was able to recommend, a man named Whitfield who worked it on shares and sent a fair accounting every quarter. It produced modest but consistent income, which Paul put into a savings account at the Caldwell Bank in James's name, because that was the kind of thing Paul did without making a ceremony of it. Alma's store continued to grow. By 1887, she had expanded into the space next door when the saddle shop moved to a larger premises, and the expanded Bailey's Dry Goods was one of the best-stocked stores between Wichita and the Strip, with Dora managing the daily operations with an authority and skill that made Alma proud in the particular way you are proud when someone you've given a chance to turns out to be capable beyond your expectations. In the summer of 1888, Alma and Paul had their second child, a daughter they named Rose, after no one in particular but because Paul said it the afternoon she was born, and the name fitted itself to the baby so precisely that no other name was considered. Rose was quieter than James had been as an infant, watchful and deliberate in the way of someone who is taking notes, and Paul said with great fondness that she took after her mother. James, at 4 years old, was fascinated by his sister in a proprietary, earnest way that made every adult who observed it feel tender, and he was often found sitting beside her crib, narrating the events of his day to her in the serious tone of a person delivering important information to an important audience. Paul finished the bank building commission and was immediately engaged for the new post office, and then the school addition, and the work continued to come in the way good work does when it is well done and honestly priced, and he and his 4 workers were reliably busy and reliably satisfied. And on evenings when the weather permitted, he and Alma still sat on the bench outside the store and talked about everything and nothing while the town went about its Caldwell business around them. One evening in the fall of 1888, sitting on that bench with the prairie sky doing its autumn performance in shades of amber and deep rose, Paul said, "Do you remember the beans?" "The beans," she said. "That first day," he said, "the horse threw the shoe and the beans went everywhere. I remember you picked them up." "I picked up about a third of them," he said. "You swept up the rest yourself before I came back." "How do you know I swept them up before you came back?" "Because you are not a person who leaves beans on the boardwalk," he said. She laughed, and the laugh went out into the October air, clean and uncomplicated. "I thought you were going to be trouble," she said. "Was I trouble?" "No," she said. "You were the opposite of trouble." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You were the thing that made everything less troubling." He put his arm around her, and they sat in the last of the evening light, and the town of Caldwell moved around them in its ordinary and particular way, and the store was at their backs with its lights off, and its clean shelves, and its iron box with everything that needed keeping, and somewhere inside their home, their children were sleeping under wool quilts in the first cold of the autumn. The years had a quality about them that Alma would try to describe once to Clara later, when Clara asked her what it was like, being happy in the way she was happy. She had said it was like being well fed. Not the excitement of a feast, but the deep, reliable satisfaction of never being hungry, of knowing that what you needed would be there, had been there, would continue to be there in the honest and practical hands of a person who meant what they said and said what they meant. In the spring of 1890, with James 5 and Rose not yet 2, and the store and the shop both thriving, and the Missouri land producing steady income, and the town of Caldwell fully settled into its post-cattle drive identity as a real and permanent place, Paul came home one evening to find Alma at the kitchen table with her ledger and 2 cups of tea, and she looked up when he came in and said, "I made a profit this quarter that is twice what I made the same quarter 2 years ago." He sat down and she showed him the numbers, because she always showed him the numbers even though the store was hers and the numbers were hers, because they were also his in the way that everything they had was both theirs, separately and together, in the arrangement they had worked out with Marsh all those years ago and that had proved itself every year since. He looked at the ledger and then at her. "What do you want to do with it?" he said. "I want to add another room to the house," she said. "For when the children are bigger and need their own space, and I want to put some into the land fund for James, and I want to invest some back into the store." "And some for yourself," he said. "The room and the store are for myself," she said. "Something that's just pleasure," he said. "Not practical." She thought about it. "There's a piano I've seen in the Wichita catalog," she said, with the air of someone admitting something. "Order it," he said. "It's not practical," she said. "Order it," he said. "You've been running a practically minded operation since before I met you. A piano is a reasonable thing to want." The piano arrived in June and was installed in the front room of their home behind the store, and Paul sat on the bench outside and listened to Alma learning to play it in the evenings, halting and then less halting, and then, by September, genuinely musical in the way of someone who has a natural ear and is determined besides, and the sound of it coming through the window of their home while the Caldwell evening settled around him was one of the things he would list in later years, when he thought about what it meant to have a life. James learned to play too, taught by his mother with the same patient and thorough approach she brought to everything, and Rose sat on the floor beside the piano bench, and moved her small hands in the air in imitation of what she saw her mother and brother doing. A private performance for an audience of no one, which Paul observed from the doorway one evening with a feeling in his chest that was so complete it was almost difficult to bear. The summer of 1891 brought a smaller crisis and a larger resolution. The bank in Caldwell, the one Paul had fitted the interior for, underwent a change in ownership, and the new owners had different ideas about the interest rates on existing business loans, and Paul's shop loan, which was in its final year anyway, suddenly became more expensive by several percentage points. It was manageable, but it was irritating, and the two of them sat at the kitchen table and worked through the numbers the way they always worked through things, together and methodically, and they paid the loan off entirely rather than continuing at the new rate, using the Missouri farm income and a portion of the store's strong quarterly showing. And they went to bed that night in a room that had no loans in it belonging to either of them, and that felt like a particular kind of clean. "Remember when I had $42 left on Thomas's debt?" she said in the dark. "I remember you telling me," he said. "I was so afraid it was never going to end," she said. "The debt feeling. The way it sits at the bottom of everything. And now it's just us," she said. "The money is just ours, the store is just mine, the shop is just yours, no one else's calculation in it." "That took about 9 years," he said. "It didn't take 9 years," she said. "The debt was paid in 1883. This is just the rest of it, the part where there's nothing left to worry about." "You'll find something to worry about," he said. "I will," she agreed. "But it will be a proper worry, something real and present, not an inherited problem." He found her hand in the dark and held it, and outside the Kansas night was large and quiet and full of stars, and the house was solid around them. The house with the room they had added, and the piano in the front room, and the children asleep in their separate spaces, growing into themselves with the particular confidence of children who have never had to wonder whether their parents were steady. In the autumn of 1892, on a day when Caldwell was putting on its finest October colors, the kind of day when the light comes in at a low angle and makes everything look like something worth painting, Alma stood behind the counter of Bailey's dry goods and watched through the window as Paul crossed the main street toward the store. He was 40 years old or nearly, and the years had put some gray in his dark hair at the temples, and his hands when he came in were the hands of a man who had built things with them for a long time, capable and marked by work, and his face was the face she knew better than she knew her own, the face she had learned in its every mood and expression over the decades she had been watching it. He came through the door and she said, "What do you need?" "Nothing," he said. "I just wanted to see how the morning was going." "It's going well," she said. "Dora sold the last of the autumn calico before 9 o'clock. I need to order more." "Order more," he said. "I was going to," she said. He leaned on the counter, and she leaned on the counter on the other side, and they looked at each other across the 4 feet of solid wood counter that had been there when Thomas bought the store and had survived every year since. And she thought about all the things that had been said and decided and worked out over this counter with him and before him, and she thought that it was a very good counter. "Paul," she said. "Alma," he said. "I'm going to need to expand the store again next year," she said. "The space on the other side is coming available. The cobbler is retiring. Do you want to take it?" "I think I do," she said. "Then take it," he said. "I was going to," she said. "I know," he said. "I know you were." She smiled at him, the full smile that she did not give everyone, the one that she had started giving him somewhere in the middle of the summer of 1882 and had never stopped. He smiled back, the smile that transformed his face, the one that she had catalogued on a May afternoon and never finished cataloguing because it continued to be new every time. Outside, the October Main Street of Caldwell went about its business. Horses and people, and the ordinary commerce of a town that had found its shape and settled into it. The sky over the prairie was the enormous clear blue of the deep autumn, and somewhere in that sky the first geese of the season were going over, their sound faint and high and going south, and the sound of it came through the store window and made them both look up for a moment, listening. Then Dora called from the back that she needed help with the delivery that had just arrived, and Alma straightened up and went to help, and Paul went back across the street to his shop, and the day continued in the warm and ordinary and deeply satisfying way of days that are lived by people who have built something true and are continuing to build it, who have nothing left to fear and everything left to love, who know that whatever comes next, they will sit down together in the evening and work it out. Side by side over a kitchen table and a cup of coffee, in the particular and deliberate and tender way they have always done everything, which is together.